Con estas jornadas pretendemos no solo llamar la atención de la sociedad civil en torno a los derechos digitales. Creemos que cada vez más las instituciones están entendiendo la urgencia de hablar sobre esos temas y tomar una posición.
Después de 4 años, cuando iniciamos, que no había nada de regulación al respecto, ni se estaban debatiendo los derechos digitales en videojuegos, este año hemos podido contar con esta eurodiputada Maldonado, que nos hablaba de las regulaciones que se están impulsando, ya no solo a nivel España, con las que contábamos el año pasado, sino a nivel europeo, lo cual creemos que es un gran avance, aunque todavía queda mucho camino por recorrer.
En el informe se hace un llamamiento especial a la Comisión Europea para que evalúen más a fondo el problema de las prácticas agresivas y los diseños de juego engañosos, y que evalúe cómo regular las cajas botín o loot boxes.
Que habría que hacer un trabajo transdisciplinario desde dentro de los desarrolladores de agencias digitales, etcétera, para que puedan tomar conciencia que detrás de ese usuario hay una persona y que esa persona está enmarcada en un sistema de derechos.
Hemos empezado con la Mesa Ciudadana del Videojuego, donde hemos aunado industria, sociedad civil, academia, en torno a retos que realmente son difíciles y que realmente son incipientes en la sociedad. Creo que estamos marcando metodología de trabajo colaborativo en torno a temas que cada vez más serán centrales. A la vez hemos generado conocimiento abierto para empoderar las comunidades con Baba School de Isicano, donde jóvenes y docentes a la vez han podido aprender cómo a través de un videojuego es posible generar cultura, pedagogía y romper estereotipos. Y por otro lado, con Rafa Laguna, cómo a través del videojuego es posible construir tecnología libres.
Podemos ver cómo se establece también este software como un software de referencia para la producción profesional, que cada vez está teniendo muchísimos más usuarios y muchísimo más comunidad alrededor.
Por si no lo conocéis, Blood Engine es un motor de código abierto para hacer videojuegos de todo tipo. 2D, 3D, también puedes hacer programas, aplicaciones y de todo un poco. Godot incluye todas las herramientas que te hagan falta para hacer un videojuego, desde editor de mapas, animaciones, editor de código, y al ser de código abierto puedes hacer con él lo que quieras.
Hemos establecido como una nueva forma de entender estas jornadas, no solo como un lugar, un espacio de debate, sino un espacio de creación y colaboración.
Creo que es un punto muy interesante ver cómo partimos casi de una nada donde apenas se está trabajando el tema, a esta parte en la que ya todas las ideas y cuestiones empiezan a sentar, y esperamos que todos los pasos y todo el camino que todavía queda por hacer de cara a las siguientes esté todavía más cimentado. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas al segundo día de estas quintas jornadas en defensa de los derechos digitales en videojuegos. Esta sesión del día de hoy estaremos abordando videojuegos desde el Antropoceno, transición ecológica y juego digital. Evidentemente, lo ecológico dentro de los videojuegos siempre es algo o un tema a tratar, para bien o para mal. Por un lado, por el impacto ecológico que generan los propios videojuegos, pero por otro lado, pues por sus posibilidades de incidencia política, de concienciación también medioambiental. Hemos visto, por ejemplo, en años pasados que contamos con la gente de Matajuegos, su videojuego documental Atuel, sobre el río Atuel y las personas que viven alrededor y el impacto que tiene el deterioro de este río en el ecosistema. También hemos podido ver, por ejemplo, que Hero Beats con Endling ganó un BAFTA también abordando tema ecológico. O sea, estamos viendo también una tendencia hacia abordar cada vez más este tipo de temas que son bastante interesantes.
Y hay una tendencia en el mercado recién en contabilizar las emisiones, contabilizar el impacto de la misma industria y tratar de mitigar cierto tipo de efectos que se puedan dar, encontrar formas de desarrollo más sostenibles, formas de consumo más sustentables. Obviamente nos queda un largo camino por hacer.
Y como veremos, no solo sirven para concienciar, sino que también pueden servir para tomar decisiones colectivas y para otras muchas cosas. Así que bueno, vamos a iniciar con este primer día y con nuestras ponencias de hoy.
Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Bueno, y vamos a abrir esta segunda sesión con la ponencia de Matteo Lupetti, que es... Ayúdame, por favor. ¿El título?
Videojuegos, el medio del Antropoceno.
Ajá. Bueno, la verdad que, Matteo es un personaje, Matteo Lupetti es un personaje muy interesante, un intelectual muy refinado, es un crítico de arte de videojuego marxista italiano, participa en diferentes colectivos de crítica y de práctica artística, de organización, entre cuales son Guarpa, que escucharemos mañana. Escribe en diferentes periodos, entre cuales el manifiesto y Art Tribune, siempre de arte, videojuego y política, y es autor de un libro espectacular que tuve el placer de leer, un libro que de momento está solo en italiano, se llama Udo, Guida ai videogiochi nell'Antropocene, y nos viene a hablar de esto, de la relación entre videojuego y antropoceno y crisis climática. Así que, sin más, damos palabra a Matteo.
We live in the Anthropocene, the epoch of human-made climate change, and gaming is its medium. Hi everybody, I'm Matteo Lupetti, I'm an art and game critic from Italy. I use they, them pronouns, and this is Video Games, the Antropocene Medium, a pre-recorded speech for the 5th Conference in Defense of Video Games Digital Rights. During my talk, you can scan the QR codes you see on the left side of the screen and reach my sources. Other credits are at the end of the video. My talk will develop some of the concepts introduced in my book Udo, Guida ai videogiochi nell'Antropocene, The Unidentified Digital Object, a Guide to Video Game in the Anthropocene, published in Italy by Nuove Sido as part of the Tebe collection curated by Vita Roberta Cantarini. We sometimes see video games as rule-based digital environments designed in order to make us fulfill our fantasies. Video games are digital places where we can be someone we are not and where we can do things we wouldn't be able to do in the physical world. This is an often criticized aspect of the video game medium. In this talk, I use medium in a loose sense of the term to define an expressive tool. Video games can be seen as escapist power fantasies, where we can give vent to frustrated desires we can't fulfill in our everyday life. Video games digitally actualize the meritocratic regime promised and never delivered by neoliberal societies. And I agree with this criticism, but I think video games in particular, and games in general, are far more shaped and defined by the limits of what they allow us to do. Of course, video games need to have special narrative and operational boundaries. They are limited digital experiences, and those limits define their scope. But the border between what's included and what's not included within the simulated world of a video game can also show us the ideology underlying the virtual representation of places, entities, activities and processes designed by the human quarters of the software. Playing video games is a liminal experience.
Every game is defined by its borders, its endings, and its extremities. Often, playing a video game feels like pushing against those borders.
Players can renegotiate these borders. They can try to get through or over the invisible walls and the insurmountable rock formations at the end of the game map. They can even hack and modify the software. In a certain sense, playing a video game often means testing its limits and boundaries, understanding what characters can and can't do, understanding where the map ends and where it's hiding secret passages. Games, as a concept, can only happen within those more or less defined limits, within a possibility horizon, that is, within the borders, the frontiers of a possibility space, what a game allows us to do inside its rule systems and its digital spaces. A game without limits is not a game at all. It's often said that games happen inside a magic circle, a specific spatial, temporal and social dimension where we accept to follow rules different from the rules of everyday life and where we have different goals. People can be either inside or outside a magic circle. They can either be players or non-players, and they have to voluntarily enter into a magic circle or create one in order to take part in a game. Like the possibility horizon, even the magic circle can be renegotiated, and it's also porous. It's never completely detached from the outside world. The playing field of a sport is an example of a magic circle, but it doesn't have to be a physical space. The concept of the magic circle is usually credited to historian Johann Huizinga, author of an influential and extremely dated book titled Homo Ludens. But Huizinga just lists the magic circle as one of many possible playgrounds, together with the arena, the card table, the temple, and so on. The current and often criticized concept of the magic circle was actually formalized by Eric Zimmerman and Katie Salan in their book Rules of Play: Game Design Fundamentals, and it's based on the game design classes taught by Zimmerman and Frank Lantz. So, what I'm talking about when I use the term game is a specific kind of ludic activity, characterized by a possibility horizon and by a magic circle. That's what anthropologist Roger Caillois called ludus, the rule-based game different from the paideia, the free-form playing of children. Video games can sometimes propose something more similar to the paideia, with almost boundless maps, multiple gameplay options and possible approaches, and goalless experiences. That's the case with sandbox video games such as Mojang's Minecraft, and with video toys such as Oscar Stallberg and Rolf Hurry's City Builder Townscaper. But even in similar cases, we are still playing ludus, the plural should be ludi. We are playing within and negotiating with a specifically limited digital experience. We can also frame how games define what we can and can't do and their boundaries in a slightly different way. What games do is shaping our agency, our possibility as agents, as actors. In fact, according to philosopher Thi Nguyen, games are the art of agency.
A game tells us to take up a particular goal. It designates abilities for us to use in pursuing that goal. It packages all that up with a set of obstacles, crafted to fit those goals and abilities. A game uses all these elements to sculpt a form of activity. And when we play games, we take on an alternate form of agency. We take on new goals and accept different sets of abilities. We give ourselves over to different and focused ways of inhabiting our own agency. Goals, ability, and environment, these are the means by which game designers practice their art. And we experience the game designer's art by flexing our own agency to fit. Games, then, are a unique social technology. They are a method for inscribing forms of agency into artifactual vessels, for recording them, preserving them, and passing them around. And we possess a special ability: we can be fluid with our agency, we can submerge ourselves in alternate agencies designed by another. In other words, we can use games to communicate forms of agency.
In his book Games, Agency as Art, which starts with a new version of his previous article, Games and the Art of Agency, Nguyen focuses on a specific type of games, the Switzian games, which follows the definition by Bernard Switz in the Grasshopper games Life and Utopia. Game playing is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. In basketball, for example, players have to throw a ball inside a basket. That's called the preludic goal. The easiest and more efficient way would be to take a couple of ladders, climb them, and conveniently let the ball fall inside the basket. But we aren't actually interested in the prelusory goal. For example, we are not actually interested in merely putting the ball inside the basket. Instead, we decide to follow certain rules and to accept certain constraints in order to make the activity more difficult. The actual game lies in overcoming those arbitrary obstacles. The illusory goals emerge from the interaction between the pre-illusory goal and the constraints. Again, the game exists because of accepted restrictions, because it lets us adopt a temporary agency with specific limits. Nguyen also focuses on a specific way of playing these games, striving play. That is, when we play just for the pleasure of playing, of struggling, as opposed to achievement play, when we play to win or to obtain what our winning will give us. In striving play, as Nguyen explained, we just want to have a good time. But in order to have such a good time, we have to act as we actually care about the results of the match. We have to fully commit to a new agency shaped by the game itself. According to Nguyen, this is possible because we can layer different agencies. We can nest them within each other, and then throw them away as soon as we don't need them anymore. How that layering happens, or whether it happens at all, and how people can continuously move between different agencies is still disputed. And I don't think it's important for today's discussion. As I don't think it's important whether video games are art. Art is a loaded Western concept with a colonialist past. But in another often disputed section of the book, Nguyen claims that games are participatory process art, that is, their aesthetic qualities are not fixed into an object, a painting for example, and can't really be appreciated by a passive audience, but emerge in players' action while they're playing. And he tries to prove the status of games as art by analyzing how they can engender aesthetic experiences in their players. I personally think this part has at least one big merit. It posits the potential artistic value of games and video games in their gameplay, instead of in something games and video games inherited from some other medium, their storytelling, their art direction. But what I'm actually interested in is this idea of game design as agency design, and, as Nguyen explains, wearing different agencies could give us the opportunity to experiment within the safe space of a game within which we can play with and test condensed and focused models of the world outside the magic circle. But Nguyen prefers not to use this term. A collection of games is a library of agencies, a library where we can borrow, try and return agencies in order to be exposed to a wide range of agential experiences and to train our agential fluidity.
When we are more familiar with different agential modes, we will have a wider range of options for how we will conduct ourselves in practical situations. Games can help build our inventory of ways of being practical. And such an inventory, when well and appropriately managed, can support our freedom and autonomy.
Studying games and video games from the point of view of the agencies they allow us to inhabit also shows how little we still understand about the very concept of agency. Game design and game criticism thus give us an opportunity to delve into this often overlooked aspect of human life. And this put video games, and games in general, in a unique position among media to contribute to one of the most important discussions of our current epoch. And, as I said, our current epoch is the epoch of human-made climate change. Before the late 18th century and the Industrial Revolution, global average concentration of carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere was around 280 parts per million. It was 419.3 parts per million in 2023. Carbon dioxide comes from the burning of fossil fuels, such as coal and oil, and is a heat-trapping gas. We usually call similar gases greenhouse gases. Methane is another powerful greenhouse gas. It can also come from natural processes, but more than half of today's methane emissions are the results of human activities, such as agriculture. The concentration of atmospheric methane has more than doubled during the last 200 years. The presence of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has increased Earth's global average temperature. 2023 was the warmest year on record since the beginning of record keeping in 1880. The Earth was 1.36 degrees Celsius warmer than before the end of the 19th century, when large-scale burning of fossil fuels for energy was beginning. This is the so-called global warming, part of the largest phenomenon of climate change. The Paris Agreement is an international treaty on climate change adopted during the United Nations Climate Change Conference of 2015 in Paris, France. Its goal is limiting the increase of the global average temperature below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and trying to limit this increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's not going very well. In 2023, the global average temperature was already 1.45 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and experts expect global average temperature to keep increasing in the next decades if new policies are not urgently adopted. Global warming causes the melting of ice sheets and glaciers and the expansion of seawater. Warm water occupies more space than cold water, and they in turn cause sea level rise. Another effect of global warming and climate change is an increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events like heat waves, hurricanes, floods and droughts. While heat and extended droughts are increasing the risk and the extent of wildfires, climate is not the only system we have changed. Ocean acidification is an often ignored effect of our impact on Earth's systems. Oceans absorb atmospheric carbon dioxide that combines with water to form an acid, the carbonic acid. So, as atmospheric carbon dioxide increases, the acidity of seawaters also increases, with dire consequences for marine forms of life, which for example build their shells with more difficulty. We've already significantly altered 2/3 of the marine environment and 3/4 of the land-based environment, and from 1992 to 2019 the size of urban areas have more than doubled. The use of synthetic fertilizers in agriculture also contributed to nitrogen pollution. Nitrogen can, for example, cause rapid increases of toxic algae in waters and can turn into another powerful greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide. In about the last 10,000 years, 1/3 of Earth's forest has disappeared. Half of this loss occurred in the last 100 years. During the last century, the total weight of human-made artifacts has doubled roughly every 20 years. And around 2020, this total anthropogenic mass, most buildings and infrastructures, has exceeded the global biomass, that is, the total mass of all living things, while the total mass of the plastic we produced has exceeded the total combined mass of all marine and terrestrial animals. Because of mining, land clearance, and the expansion of cities and infrastructure, every year we move 24 times the amount of materials moved by rivers. We are the most relevant agent of landscape evolution. Starting from the 15th century, intercontinental travels and the human ability to rapidly move people, animals, plants, viruses, bacteria and cultures all over the world have shortened distances and rearranged whole ecosystems. In practice, human beings have reunited all the land masses into only one supercontinent, where geographic boundaries are losing their meaning. A supercontinent like the Pangea that disassembled into the current continents about 175 million years ago. A new Pangea. In this new Pangea created by humankind, the voluntary or involuntary introduction of invasive, non-native species is homogenizing populations and causing loss of biodiversity. And all those phenomena, global warming, ocean acidification, the new Pangea, and in general the human impact on ecosystems, all those phenomena are causing a new mass extinction, the sixth since Earth's formation. Our pressure on ecosystems and biodiversity and the biotic homogenization driven by globalization are also boosting the emergence of new pandemics, like COVID-19.
We invade tropical forests and other wild landscapes, which harbor so many species of animals and plants, and within those creatures, so many unknown viruses. We cut the trees, we kill the animals or cage them and send them to markets. We disrupt ecosystems, and we shake viruses loose from their natural hosts. When that happens, they need a new host. Often, we are it.
The Anthropocene is a proposed geological epoch characterized and dominated by the human impact on environments, ecosystems, and climate systems. The current discussion on the Anthropocene epoch begins in the year 2000, thanks to meteorologist Nobel Prize Paul Crutzen and biologist Eugene F. Stormer. An epoch is one of the geological time units used by the International Union of Geological Sciences, IUGS, in order to distinguish, describe and study the events in the history of the Earth, starting from its formation 4.5 billion of years ago. Eons are the largest geological time units and they are divided into years. Years are divided into periods, and periods are divided into epochs. Then we have sub-epochs and ages. Nowadays, We live in the Holocene epoch, a phase of relatively stable climate started 11,700 years ago with the end of the last glacial period. The Holocene is part of the Quaternary period, of the Cenozoic era, of the Phanerozoic Eon. Taking a cue from Stormer, was already using the term Anthropocene in the 80s, Crutzen proposed to consider the Holocene epoch to have ended. Human beings have become a geomorphic force, and in millions of years the creatures inhabiting the future Earth will be able to see the effect of our actions in the geological strata, in the rocks, in the ice, as today we see the evidence of the impact of the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, the non-avian dinosaurs, and marks the end of the Cretaceous period and the Mesozoic era. That was the fifth, and currently the last, mass extinction. We are geological agents. We are reassembling the Pangea, we are terraforming the planet, and so we have created a geological epoch. We are in the Anthropocene, from the ancient Greek anthropos, human, and kainos, recent. In 2009, the Subcommission on Quaternary Stratigraphy, SQS, part of the IUS, created the Anthropocene Working Group, AWG, in order to evaluate the formalization of the Anthropocene as an official geological epoch. Crutzen, together with Sturmer, originally said that the Anthropocene should start with James Watt's invention of the steam engine in 1784 and the Industrial Revolution. Other scholars put forward different proposals. The human-made extinction of megafauna in the Pleistocene. The Pleistocene is the epoch before the Holocene, and it's usually known as the Ice Age. Or the initiation of agricultural practices and forest clearances with already an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Or the beginning of the European colonization of the Americas. In 2019, the AWG concluded that a new geological epoch was justified by the magnitude of human impact. And in 2021, the AWG decided to place the start of the Anthropocene in 1952. So, the proposed Anthropocene will have corresponded with the Great Acceleration, the unprecedented increase in technological development, economic activity, human population and consumption of resources after the Second World War. Even the development of informatics and video gaming were a product of the Great Acceleration. Video games are a product of the current peak of the Anthropocene. The proposal was rejected by UGS in 2024. The proposed Anthropocene epoch was too brief. Epochs usually last millions of years. With an official definition of the Anthropocene, even the Holocene would be an anomaly. It would have lasted 111,700 years. And the proposed Anthropocene was too limited. Less than a century, less than a human life, couldn't represent the long history of anthropic impact on environmental system. At least, the IUGS recognized that
the Anthropocene, as a concept, will continue to be widely used, not only by Earth and environmental scientists, but also by social scientists, politicians and economists, as well as by the public at large. As such, it will remain an invaluable descriptor in human-environment interactions.
Thus, I feel authorized to keep using the term, not as a strict geological time unit, but as the name of a crisis. An environmental crisis, first of all, but also a cultural crisis, a crisis in the relationship between human and non-human. We can group the different responses to the crisis of the relationship between the human and the non-human ignited by the Anthropocene into three different categories. First possible response. The Anthropocene marks the ultimate human victory over the non-human world. We didn't know we could be geological agents. We didn't think we were able to modify global climate systems. But our technology created the Anthropocene, and this means that now we have full sovereignty over what we call nature, and we can solve the climate crisis through the same technology and the same processes that caused it. Solutions designed according to this perspective usually focus only on a top-down mitigation of climate change, simplistically seen as the unique urgent issue, while they ignore all the other effects of human impact on Earth's ecosystem and the consequences of exploitation and depletion of natural resources. The first perspective is the capitalist and techno-scientific response of the so-called green economy, that is, green capitalism. Even the Anthropocene can be exploited. It can become a new business opportunity. That's why I have proposals such as solar engineering, deflecting incoming sun's ray before they hit Earth, maybe by spraying reflective particles into the upper layers of the atmosphere. Geoengineering projects could have global unknown consequences, and they could divert fundings and attention from real efforts to cut emissions and legitimize companies that want to keep extracting and burning fossil fuels. Forests, water, wetlands, threatened species are ecosystem services now, and they are monetized as such in the new natural capital assets market. In order to do so, global finance must first expropriate and accumulate these natural capital assets, which are concentrated in the global south. In addition, more than half of the minerals necessary for the green transition, such as lithium for batteries, are inside or near territories managed by indigenous or peasant people. But proponents of this first possible response to the Anthropocene crisis choose to ignore the historical relationship between current environmental destruction and centuries of colonialism, as slavery and colonialism were fundamental to the accumulation of land and wealth necessary for the development of capitalism and for the Industrial Revolution. And they choose to ignore the ongoing legacies of violent land dispossession against the global south and the indigenous communities whose lands can be exploited again in order to mine these energy transition minerals and metals. The green transition becomes the transition from a consumption model based on the destructive extraction of fossil fuels to a consumption model based on the destructive extraction of minerals. Even the establishment of national parks was originally based on the violent eviction of indigenous residents. Protected areas had to be an ideal wilderness completely devoid of human life. This capitalist perspective on the Anthropocene crisis also favors a neoliberal approach focused on individual responsibility. The responsibility and cost for climate change adaptation and mitigation measures are often pushed onto consumers and the working class by regulations and policies adopted and enforced without investigating and understanding their needs. This has resulted in protests such as the 2018 Yellow Vest movement in France. Free Lives and Devolver Digital's Terra Nil is a good video game example of this first possible perspective. In each level of this simulation based on the city building genre, players must terraform and reconstruct various ecosystems, restore biomes in order to attract animals, and then destroy and recycle all the buildings they built and leave the area. Talking about Terra Nil, Italian game designer Marco Spalgatti writes,
"The reclamation-based approach of the game is driven by a cause-effect logic, devoid of any complexity. A certain combination of temperature and humidity will bring rain, and rain will grow grass. A few more touches and birds, toads, and wolves will appear out of nowhere. The environment will passively accept everything, and it will let itself be reshaped at our pleasure. And this despite the large amount of things we still don't know about climate and environments."
The second possible response to the human-non-human crisis of the Anthropocene is announcing the victory of the non-human. We are doomed. The first and the second approach have a common origin. They're both based on the idea that human and non-human culture and nature are both distinguished and hopelessly conflicting and incompatible. For example, as we've already seen, you can't even let indigenous people inhabit their own lands if you want to preserve their ecosystems. From this point of view, the Anthropocene is an unavoidable consequence of our being human. So, supporters of this position usually propose an early dating for the Anthropocene, since they want to emphasize its ties with humankind as a whole and since remote times. Finally, the third possible response. This is not only a crisis of the relationship between human and non-human. This is a crisis of the very distinction between human and non-human.
At stake is the Earth in its totality, and humanity collectively. Global history enters nature, global nature enters history. This is something utterly new in philosophy.
Human time and geological time were not considered commensurate in scale, but in the Anthropocene they are one and the same. It's no longer possible to think non-human history, the history of climate, the history of flora and fauna, and even the history of minerals and rocks. It's no longer possible to think non-human history without considering human history, without considering human impact. And it's no longer possible to think human history without considering climate change. Human beings themselves, their societies and their politics are now understood as completely intertwined with non-human entities and surpass the boundaries of classical anthropology. Given that there is no fracture between human and non-human, even our impact on Earth systems can be so unique. In fact, Earth's atmosphere has been deeply modified and influenced by life forms since the very beginning of life on Earth, and in more dramatic ways than we have seen in the last 2 centuries with human-made climate change. Life created Earth's atmosphere, indeed. Around 3.5 million years ago, the first bacteria capable of photosynthesis appeared in the oceans. Photosynthesis is the biochemical process that allows to convert sunlight, carbon dioxide and water into food, while producing oxygen as a waste product. It's how plants work. And it's why we need forests if you want to keep atmospheric carbon dioxide at bay. When those first bacteria appeared, Earth's atmosphere contained high concentration of carbon dioxide, maybe 1,000 times higher than now, and almost no oxygen, which was even toxic for those microbes. It was a waste product, as I said. But those bacteria oxygenated the atmosphere, depleting atmospheric carbon dioxide and promoting the evolution of organisms fit to survive in an oxygen-rich environment. Organisms, such as human beings. The so-called nature-culture divide, the idea that humankind lives outside nature and even in a higher position, is a typically Western concept, and so is modern science. The concept is rooted in the anthropocentric Judeo-Christian tradition, that in turn has been developed from the ideologies that have sustained the agricultural revolution in Mesopotamia. In the Bible, human beings are created in God's image, and they have been given sovereignty over everything else. Human beings are the masters and the keepers of God's creation, but it exists only for our hands, and it's an almost passive background for our act. Nature was not anymore inhabited by spirits and gods who we had to negotiate with. Nature became a wilderness that we had the right to conquest and that we could study in order to understand God's will, their plan for us. Nature could become an object of scientific inquiry, a system ruled by the autonomous and abstract laws of physics and mathematics. The Judeo-Christian tradition also has given us the concept of time as linear instead of as circular, and the very concept of progress, at the basis of the European scientific revolution of the 17th century. Philosopher René Descartes offered the theoretical basis for such a revolution by introducing a radical dichotomy between nature and culture, and by placing this dichotomy even inside the human beings and their disciplines. All the physical realm, our bodies included, is res extensa, extended substance, extended passive matter ruled by mechanical laws and obliged in a strict and necessary chain of causes and consequences, while human interiority is res cogitans, thinking substance, unextended and so individual and free thought. Starting from Descartes, res extensa became the dominion of the soul science, while philosophy began to focus only on questions about the res cogitans. Then, during the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, nature began to be equated to a machine, first a mechanical clock, then a steam machine, nowadays a digital computer. A machine that we could use, compute and optimize. This logic, globally spread by colonization and globalization, still underlies international environmental regulations. Policies such as the eviction of indigenous people from protected areas, and an anthropocentric approach to the Anthropocene, considered something that should concern us only as far as human survival and the natural resources we need are threatened. We clearly and arbitrarily distinguish between what should be considered natural, which species should be seen as native, and what should be considered unnatural, what should be expelled from a certain ecosystem. We don't even ask ourselves what's actually capable to inhabit a certain region now that the effects of the Anthropocene are continuously altering and reshaping whole ecosystems and their climate. We now understand that even areas like the Amazon, zones that we have considered untouched, have always been deeply modified by all forms of life inhabiting them, human beings included. Indigenous population actually cultivated the Amazon rainforest, transporting, domesticating and modifying plants. A so-called natural and primitive Amazon, a savage terra nullius, devoid of human impact, is just a fantasy. And now ecologists know that the long-lasting assumption about the existence of a balance of nature is false. We can find interdependence within an ecosystem, but there isn't a balanced, stable and optimal state we human beings are threatening as outsiders sneaking into a forbidden world. Without the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and their adoption and development of Judeo-Christian teleology, we wouldn't have been able to design, we wouldn't even have been able to think the linear incremental progression of many video game and role-playing games. We are seeing the common ideological origins of the video game medium and the Anthropocene. But the nature-culture divide and anthropocentrism have always met some opposition. Think of the human-non-human hybrid creatures of mythologies. Think of Copernicus, who in the 16th century removed the Earth from the center of the universe. Think of Friedrich Wöhler, who in 1828 proved that organic chemical compounds could be synthesized from inorganic reagents, breaking the boundary between what's alive and what's not alive. Think of Charles Darwin, whose studies on the evolution of life showed the continuity between human and non-human animals. Nowadays, the anthropology discipline is probably the main contributor to the end of the natural-culture divide. In Beyond the Nature and Culture, anthropologist Philippe Decola shows how the Western scientific approach, called naturalism, is only one of 4 different ontological regimes developed by human beings in different places and different times and related to different relationships between the so-called culture and the so-called nature. Many scholars of different disciplines are developing new ecological thoughts based on the refusal of the nature-culture divide. This trend has various names and variations differentiated by more or less nuanced differences. I prefer to call this trend non-human turn, since all these related movements reject the privileging of human beings over the non-human world. For the proponents of this third response, the Anthropocene is not an unavoidable consequence of our being human, but it has been caused by a specific system of production, capitalism. It has been disseminated by a specific part of the world, the industrialized West, and it has been supported by a specific ideology, the nature-culture divide, first developed in Mesopotamia. For these and other reasons, scholars of the various branches of the non-human terms often prefer other terms to Anthropocene. Andrea Malm first proposed the concept of the Capitalocene, then picked up by Jason Moore, a term that highlights the role of historical and complex capitalist systems which have turned human and non-human animals, plants and rocks into investments since well before the Industrial Revolution. While philosopher Donna Haraway proposed plantation scene in order to further emphasize the role of early colonialism and of the plantation production model in turning both human and non-human beings into abstract investments and goods which could be moved all around the earth. But all the various variants of the Anthropocene and all the 3 possible responses to it see the crisis in the human-non-human relationship as rooted in another crisis, a crisis in our understanding of human and non-human agency. In the Anthropocene, we understand that we can influence processes that we supposed were well beyond our scale, such as the geological history of the Earth. We are surprised by our own agency, because we are not equipped for the planetary scale of the effects of our actions. We are not equipped for a world in which we are not distant observers anymore, but part of the phenomena we are observing. But in the Anthropocene, we also finally appreciate the agency of the non-human world. Colonialist and capitalist systems have hitherto considered the non-human as inert, dull, at best capable of a passive resistance. Now we have to acknowledge that the non-human is alive and that agency is distributed among all human and non-human actors. So, we explained that games are the medium of agency, tools we can use in order to communicate agency in spaces where we can shape and test our agencies. And we explained that the Anthropocene is a crisis of agency. In the Anthropocene, we finally understand the scale of the effects of our own agency, and we can rethink the role of human and non-human agencies. That's why I claim that gaming is the medium of the Anthropocene. Gaming is potentially the most fruitful medium in the current cultural debate, if we finally make it part of the discussion. But that would be true for games in general. However, I think video games are special in many ways. First of all, because they allow us to play with non-human agencies, the machine, the software and the hardware. We usually think of video games as authored by human beings, but other agencies contribute to their development. Glitches are a clear expression of those non-human agencies. Game designer Natalie Loeb says that
it's incredibly novel to me how each simulated world expresses malfunction in its own unique way. The way the world breaks in Half-Life 2 is wildly different from the way GTA 5 breaks. Each system is unique, and the way it breaks is expressed in its own unique way. When you manage to find a broken moment, it feels special. Errors make computers interesting. It's like they rebel and express a voice of their own for a brief moment, before things return back to normal and you're expected to pretend like that didn't just happen, as you're working your way through the tasks between cutscene to cutscene.
Bugs and glitches are usually considered defects, something that reviewers and critics should penalize games for. They're never considered an integral part of the experience. But from the point of view of the machine, bugs are not errors at all. The computer is properly executing the code. There are no mistakes and no misunderstandings. But the final output is interpreted as wrong by the human user, because it's not recognized as part of the text, probably designed by the human developers of the software. Video games are a communication tool, but glitches show us that they are not only communication tools. Or at least, that we are not always the recipients of their message. Glitches destabilize our anthropocentrism by showing us that our in-game temporary agency, as our everyday agency, is not being shaped only by human beings and in ways we can understand. This destabilization can become a moment of revelation.
Equipment in action operates in an inconspicuous usefulness, doing its work without our noticing it. When the tool fails, its unobtrusive quality is ruined. There occurs a jarring of reference, so that the tool becomes visible as what it is.
Taking a cue from a talk by Nick Montfort, game scholars call screen essentialism a certain approach only focused on what happens on the screen of digital devices, while ignoring their materiality, their different supports, their hardware, and their code. Bugs and glitches make visible on the game surface the screen what's usually hidden under it. They invite us to leave screen essentialism behind and look under the bonnet. Sometimes they force us. They force us to stop playing because the game is not working anymore as intended, at least from our human point of view. We are then obliged to engage with its non-human agency. Maybe we need to close it and look for a patch or a workaround. Maybe we need to open its installation folder. We are forced to accept the complexity of the hardware-software compound. Companies try to hide the non-human materiality of video games, as they try to hide the human labor behind them. The agency of exploited human workers and the agency of exploited non-human workers are equally erased. For example, in 2018, former creative director of Rockstar Games, Don Hauser, claimed that
games are still magical. It's like they're made by elves. You turn on the screen and it's just this world that exists on TV. I think you gain something by not knowing how they're made.
All the software is usually described and represented as immaterial. Video games are not an exceptional case. Even when the existence of software developers is at least acknowledged, they are still defined as immaterial workers.
The so-called philosophy of the so-called computer community tends systematically to obscure hardware with software, electronic signifiers with interfaces between formal and everyday languages.
But we should remember that software only exists because materially memorized, and that it runs because of physical and electrical phenomena. And video games, above all the biggest ones, are actually developed by complex human networks that can span the globe. This emphasis on the immateriality of softwares and video games finds opposition from scholars, part of a series of trends defined by Thomas Epperley and Darshana Jayman as the material turn in the discipline of game studies. Scholars of the material turn analyze video games within their social, cultural, and digital context. Video games are seen as products of labor, and they are studied in relationship with the hardware running them. I observed that video games have an obvious relationship with the technological development of the Great Acceleration, the peak of the Anthropocene, but the global network of natural resources, workers and data centers necessary for the production of their hardware and of their software and for their digital distribution highlights another relationship with another root of the Anthropocene, a relationship with colonialism. During a scene of Assassin's Creed Syndicate, set in the Victorian England, a character describes the global processes and routes necessary to drink a cup of tea in London. Writing about this scene, Marxist scholar Jamie Woodcock adds that
the video game, like the cup of tea, requires complex global supply chains and different kinds of labor to ensure the final object can be consumed by the player.
The global production, development and distribution of video games also has an environmental impact, studied by one of the scholars part of the game studies material turn, Benjamin J. Abraham, in his book Digital Games After Climate Change. Abraham's After Climate was also commissioned by Die Gute Fabrik to assess the climate impact of their game Soul Sea Chronicles. The result was the first complete and publicly freely available climate report for the development of a video game. In my book, I say that video games are unidentified digital objects, taking inspiration from the concept of the UFO, the unidentified flying object, and from ufociclismo, UFO biking. UFO biking is an Italian discipline and practice based on moving by bike in order to reread and remap urban environments in anti-capitalist ways. For UFO biking, the unidentified flying object is not alien, because alien would already be some kind of label. The UFO is truly unidentified. And since it's unidentified, and until it keeps being unidentified, it escapes the control of capitalism and its commodification processes. So, when I say that video games are UDO, I mean that, even after all our analysis, we can't claim that a video game has been completely identified and understood. I started this talk claiming that even though many video games are developed as childish power fantasies, every game limit and shape our agency. A video game gives us a limited temporary agency. But now we are seeing that our in-game agency is also limited and shaped by non-human agencies.
The player's situatedness in the game world is also determined by the ways in which they can be affected by other players, agents, or entities in the game. The player is not only an agent but also a patient. They do not only act but are also acted upon. The experience of passion, of suffering, or being acted upon, is just as intrinsic an element of the experience of games as the experience of agency.
The video game environment can be well described by philosopher Bruno Latour's Actor Network Theory, ANT. A video game is a network of human and non-human actors, a network of human and non-human agencies, each equally relevant. The result is a digital landscape which can't be any longer defined as either completely human or completely non-human, as we can't anymore define as either human or non-human the physical landscape, even, as we said, the Amazon rainforest. For us critics, this means there is no fixed external video game object we can analyze, as there's no longer a fixed external climate or a fixed concept of humanness. Video game criticism faces the same crisis faced by ecology and anthropology. Video games are part text, and they're part something else, closer to what we used to call nature. They're part human and part non-human, and they allow us to play with, and together with, human and non-human agencies. Video games are the medium of the Anthropocene.
We don't and cannot understand everything, but we are capable of thinking it. The ability to think without claiming, or even seeking, to fully understand is key to survival in a new dark age, because, as we shall see, it is often impossible to understand.
So, thank you for your attention. I'm Matteo Lupetti, and this was Video Games, the Anthropocene medium.
La verdad que la propuesta de Matteo Lupetti es impresionante, es muy interesante, es muy innovadora y rompedora. Esta forma que tiene de plantear el juego como límite y entonces ir más allá de los límites creo que nos puede hacer reflexionar mucho. Esta capacidad de agencia, ¿no?, que nos puede proporcionar el videojuego como espacio de agencia entre agentes humanos y no humanos, ¿no? Creo que un elemento muy importante donde fijarse. Siempre durante la historia reciente hemos pensado en los videojuegos como un artefacto humano por y para humanos, ¿no? Y la propuesta de Matteo nos invita a reflexionar cómo, en cambio, dentro del espacio lúdico, videolúdico, existan otros tipos de agencias no humanas, ¿no? Agencias maquínicas, tecnológicas, incontrolables desde la perspectiva humana. Como por ejemplo el glitch, ¿no? El glitch representa en la misma formulación de Matteo Lupetti esta forma de agencia no humana. Entonces, si asumimos esta capacidad del videojuego de presentarnos como un espacio de interrelación entre agencia humana y no humana, creo que es ahí donde realmente el videojuego puede ser el medio del antropoceno en esta capacidad, además de plantearnos una superación o una forma de mejoría, de superar ciertos elementos críticos que estamos viviendo hoy en día. Es una forma de juego que nos puede ayudar a repensar y a testear nuestra propia agencia en el mundo, no solo con los humanos, sino también entre humanos y no humanos, que es algo muy necesario de aquí en adelante si queremos superar esta crisis climática. Así que, pues, os invito a leer el libro y damos la palabra al siguiente ponente. Muchas gracias.
Y siguiendo con el mismo tema de esta segunda sesión, tenemos la segunda participación de hoy, que es una conferencia que se llama Diseñando actuación democrática en juegos digitales, un estudio de litio, de Philip Hauer y Gabriel Esther, donde nos van a contar un poco sobre este juego que desarrollaron para la participación democrática sobre este tema de transición ecológica.
Entran. Retomas tú, ¿verdad? Pues vamos en 3, 2, 1, acción.
Súper interesante esta participación, la verdad que se agradece esta estructura doble que han seguido dentro de la presentación, donde por un lado nos están enseñando cómo se pueden hacer estos juegos como mucho más democráticos y sin esta agencia autocrática, enlazando un poco con la conferencia anterior, cómo los jugadores no deberían ser entes que operan a través de la dominación de otros agentes del juego, como pueden ser otros personajes no jugadores u otros elementos, sino pensar en una colaboración y participación de todos estos agentes, ¿no? Me parece como muy interesante los puntos de unión que hay entre las dos conferencias de esta mesa. Y sobre todo también esta segunda parte, donde nos hablan más de este desarrollo de juego, tanto videojuego como juego de cartas, para abordar sobre el tema del litio que hay en República Checa y que pues ahora va a ser todo un tema también el extractivismo y ver cómo impacta ecológicamente todo esto y cómo lo abordan desde un punto de vista cercano también al que veíamos con Matajuegos, que se acerca quizá al juego documental porque tiene pues todas estas entrevistas a activistas, cómo se han establecido estos lazos estrechos de colaboración entre activistas, artistas locales y diseñadores de juegos, que creo que es un compendio interesante de actores para poder generar cosas como mucho más ricas y que faciliten también la participación democrática de las personas que están jugando y la toma de decisiones colectiva y compartida. Creo que este tipo de herramientas que facilitan esto son tremendamente importantes, no solo por la visibilización de los temas, sino también por permitir estos diálogos entre distintos tipos de agentes y hacerlo de una forma como tan pensada y pues además que nos están ofreciendo en toda esta primera parte de la charla la forma en la que podemos hacer estos juegos también más democráticos, ¿no? Invitándonos a participar en la creación de estos juegos. Entonces, bueno, se agradece muchísimo la participación, el tiempo tomado y pues toda esta iniciativa y llamada a la acción, que es también lo que tratamos de hacer dentro de estas jornadas, ¿no? Llamar a la acción de todos, todas, para tratar de construir un mundo pues mucho más justo.
So, hello everyone. Thank you very much for your invitation to present here our research on democratic agency in strategic eco-games. We are very pleased to be here today. My name is Gabriela Stvrtňová and I am a political scientist who is interested in political theory and democratic theory, especially in light of climate change and environmental challenges. And here with me is Philip Hauer. Hello. Who is a PhD candidate at the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, and he can introduce himself.
Yes, I'm a PhD student at the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague. I'm mostly interested in digital games, their depiction of labor, their depiction of exchange, and capitalist fictions in general. I'm also a game designer and game artist.
Good.
Thank you.
So, in today's presentation, we'll introduce our research in progress of how to incorporate the core democratic principles of equality, freedom, and some sense of collaborative decision-making into digital games. In particular, we will outline the possibility of integrating these principles into game design and gameplay mechanics to foster a sense of what we call a democratic agency in those games, specifically as perceived as democratic by the player on a procedural level. One can say that, traditionally, digital games can be understood as an undemocratic medium because they often tend to depict autocratic agency. To put it bluntly, what I mean, players usually hold asymmetric power and can intervene with any entity within the game according to their judgment. So in these terms, game rules often make the players dominant power actors over other game entities and actors within the narrative. Knowingly or not, as an art medium, digital games contribute to building the political narrative around non-democratic values such as domination and exclusive political power. Saying that, it seems that ecologically focused games, referred to as eco-games in game studies and game development, in detail discussed, for example, in a recent volume Eco-Games, edited by Laura Optebeke, Joost Rijsens, Stefan Wording and Gerald Varka, mirror the key intuitions of ecologically motivated authoritarianism in scholarly and political theory, well known as green authoritarianism. The basic assumption of green authoritarianism is, very simply said, that societies governed by, for example, democratic institutions or led by democratic principles will systematically fail to impose needed constraints and take desired steps that could mitigate the severity of, for example, climate crisis or tackle the causes of these crises. So a more effective response can be expected from systems that are that focused on empowering certain communities, certain actors who have knowledge, the tools, or the capacity to take those steps, and so the power will be handed to their own, to them only. So it will be not in the hands of many, like in democracy, but more like in authoritarian regimes, like the power will be only in the hand of a few. At the same time, democracy, as such as a concept, has received less attention in game studies and games development, and there are really scarce suggestions or recommendations on how to design democratic games or even eco-games. So in our current research, we decided to examine the possibility of implementation of democratic agency in digital game design, aiming to develop games that can potentially aid in shaping a positive democratic future in light of climate crisis and environmental challenges. With this approach, we seek to contribute to the understanding of digital games' capacity to influence society in a democratic manner. So today's lecture or talk will be divided in two parts. First, we will introduce our conceptualization of democratic agency based on freedom as non-domination, collaborative decision-making, and Bettina Bordi's theory of player agency as afforded by game design. Our primary focus will be on the procedural aspects here of designing such an agency. We will here articulate the core democratic principles and their implementation in digital game design scheme. In the second part, we will discuss this conceptualization of democratic agency in the context of the design of our new strategic card eco-game Lithium, which addresses the political concerns of lithium extractivism in global and local contexts of climate justice and energy transformation in Europe. Lithium is envisioned as an educational game that addresses the issues surrounding a proposed lithium mining operation at the Czech-German border in Cínovec and Cinwald. The game's objective is to inform players about the context of global lithium extraction, and Lithium adopts a viewpoint of residents and activists who mobilize politically to oppose the mining projects in Cínovec and Cinwald. At this point, the procedural aspect of democratic agency will be enhanced by a narrative emphasizing the crucial role of democratic decision-making practices in addressing the climate action. So, Philip, you can go.
So the following question to answer is what is player agency? We began our research with early game scholar Alexander Galloway that stated that video games are actual actions. Games as such are actional media which are in a sense brought alive by user interaction or player interaction within the game medium or algorithmic machine, to put it into Galloway's words. Such algorithmic machines moves and structures itself through specific codified rules of operation. The player, in this sense, is the one who engages with this machine, brings it alive, and whose investments are crucial for the actions that put the game rules into motion. But players also try to reach some sort of goal through actions that are guided by the game's set of rules. In essays on algorithmic culture, Galloway claimed that you must learn what will work within the game rule system. In other words, the games demand that the player gets to know the algorithmic ideology of the game in order to win player must interpret the game rules and politics based on assumptions and systems in the rules set representation. As we will argue, this interpretative agency is not entirely in the hands of players and neither in the hands of developers. Not even if we consider games designed with precise procedural rhetorics, as coined by Anne Ghost in his seminal Persuasive Games, the expressive power of video games. With the game studies scholar Bettina Bode, we will argue that the interpretation of game rules is also allowed by the degree of player agency afforded by the game design. We can see the distinction between the action and agency. The action refers to space of activities that the gameplay enables the players to explore. The agency, in contrast, refers to the capability to act within associated within some intentionality of actions, in the sense of meaningful actions as per Janet Murray's definition of player agency as meaningful player action. For Bettina Bode, there are two components that create a meaningful action. First, the meaningfulness of play emerges from the interaction between player and the system, and therefore is not inherent quality of either alone. Second, the meaningfulness to successfully emerge within the game. The impact of the player action must be palpable to the players, it must be relevant within the game itself, and also within the game responses to the players. As such, we can see the difference between the actionability and agency, and in our projects, or the projects of democratic agency, we are trying to design for both, because neither of them can stand alone. To summarize the concept of agency we will be using through the presentation, we will quote Bode's recent Video Games and Agency, also freely accessible on Routledge. To quote directly, players' agency can be conceptualized as the possibility space for a meaningful choice, expressed via player action that translates into avatar actions afforded by the game design. According to Bode's end of quote, according to Bode's conceptualization, the role of agents is not limited to narrative dimension, but rather encompasses the broader interaction between the player and the system on a multi-dimensional scale. In other words, agency is both afforded and constrained by game design and narrative, which is a key factor in conceptualization of agency we will be using in the lithium, as we will show later. Expanding upon Bode's conceptualization of agency, it is essential to consider the system elements that enable agency in video games and refer to the designs aspect of video games both on algorithmic level, as per Galloway's definition, and as well as audiovisual rendering of its governing rules, and therefore the direction the game takes to play out the sense of persuasive rhetorics within the game, but also on the level of something we will maybe later call actionable ideology, which is in a sense part of conceptualizing democratic agency in games. Our question in the end is how to incorporate democratic procedural principles in player's agency, or how to take agency from player as the sole dominant actor and rather distribute it between various actors in the simulated game space, starting with environment or non-playable characters. And this is something Gabriela will follow up on.
Okay. How to conceptualize democratic agency. As Philip already said, we ask ourselves how we can elaborate on Bettina Bode's conceptualization of this agency in order to design democratic agency in terms of how to design affords or limits player action as expressed via avatar action. But first, we needed to explore a bit the concept of democracy and its underlying principles to get some idea how to do that. Typically, democracy is characterized as a specific procedure of collective decision-making grounded in two fundamental political principles: freedom and equality. Therefore, in a democratic system, authority or power is evenly shared among the members of a bounded democratic community, allowing the members to engage in decision-making on equal foot. This engagement, in turn, fosters the members' autonomy and freedom within the community, and therefore the community is democratic. In our study of digital games, we do not concentrate on narratives related to specific democratic systems which are characterized, for example, by laws and checks and balances procedures, or, like famously, elections. Instead, our focus is on the potential to integrate kind of political decision-making grounded in the principles themselves of freedom and equality in the game's design. So this integration would afford or limit the player's actions as manifested through the avatar's behavior during gameplay. Essentially, we seek to identify a theoretical framework centered on freedom and equality that could inform our design principles for digital games. So let us then go on to briefly introduce our own understanding of freedom and equality respectively, and we here took inspiration from political theory. But democracy is basically an essentially contested term, so our understanding of those principles is not universal. It is important to acknowledge that. So as we mentioned in the introduction, the concept of freedom as non-domination is the foundation of our own approach. Freedom as non-domination is a negative conception of freedom, but broader than simply being free from coercion or interference, as in, for example, Isaiah Berlin's interpretation. Isaiah Berlin was a famous political philosopher that wrote a seminal work on how we understand freedom in political context. Rather, freedom as non-domination emphasizes an individual's independence from subjugation by arbitrary powers in a community. In political theory, it is commonly linked to neo-republicanism and developed recently, for example, by Philippe Petit. But the concept, we believe, is applicable to a range of situations, not only republics as a state form. To put it simply, the core of this conceptualization of freedom. Freedom as non-domination refers to the absence of uncontrolled or arbitrary, in other words, interference by other actors. The term arbitrary particularly refers to the act of intervention, which is determined or judged solely by a dominant actor. In other words, this dominant actor or agent has the power to choose or not choose the act of interference over other individuals according to her will and her wish, which grants this actor dominance under the given conditions in the given community. The essential thing is that domination does not necessarily consist in constant interfering with the individuals, but in the possibility itself of the dominant agent doing so. The paradigmatic example from Republican political theory here is that of a slave and a slave owner. A slave may have a slave owner who is kind and refrains from interfering with the slave, although the slave owner has the power to do so if she changes her mind. So the slave having the benign slave owner is not really free, in fact, because there is still dependence of the slave owner's goodwill. Therefore, in order to individuals in a given society be free, specific mechanisms, processes, rules, procedures, or even design decisions, in fact, are required to prevent the emergence of such arbitrary dominant power among individuals. We are particularly drawn to this idea because it defines freedom as a form of societal independence. It is an idea of social freedom, which encompasses a specific community's institution, practices, procedures, and design decisions, as we already mentioned. This conception of freedom necessitates careful consideration of the actions that are permitted and those that are restricted, like similarly as in the idea of procedural agency as in Bettina Bouy's approach. So when considering the implementation of such practices and procedures in democracy or a democratic system or environment or democratic game, the principle of equality, the second principle of democracy, is essential to consider. As Philippe Petit, for example, stated, democracy must be a system that ensures equal control over the government to align with the concept of freedom and non-domination. Contestation, for example, serve as the essential mechanism by which democracies can attain the ideal of equal control over government, and we can conceive of this contestation in several ways. In the context of democratic states and in the institutional approach, Petit talks about a mixed constitution with separation of power, like legislative, judicial and executive powers, where multiple points of control compete and balance each other. And the second is a contestatory citizenry that is more likely to resist government abuse through activities like activism, protests, and social movements. Philippe Petit's perspective, which is probably the most famous in freedom as non-domination, is often viewed as individualistic, as for example Simone Chambers has discussed in her book Contemporary Democratic Theory. According to Petit, no person must be placed in a state of domination, either towards other individuals or toward the government. However, there are also other more relational approaches to this idea of freedom. For example, Christian Rosbaugh suggests a more relational intersubjective concept of non-domination, where democratic procedures that encourage equal participation, and that is important, the participation from everyone in decision-making, are crucial in creating non-domination relationships. This kind of relational assumption of democratic procedures and democratic system or environment is very close to our own understanding of the freedom as non-domination and to our application of the concept to the eco games design. So, examining digital game mechanics and design decisions from the perspective of freedom as non-domination, we argue that the player typically possesses an equal power and can interact with other avatars and entities playing a role within the game according to their own will. Consequently, eco games, or digital games in general, position the player as a dominant figure within the gameplay experience and within the gameplay narrative. So, in order to implement freedom as non-domination, we argue that the extent of player agency provided by game design should be regarded as a form of distributed power among the players and other game entities, objects, characters, or for example non-playable characters that can emerge in the game, in a manner that considerably avoids domination of the player, eventually the domination of other game entity within the narrative. Ideally, achieving the game's democratic objective, would require a mutually dependent collaboration and contestations between the player's action as translated into the avatar's action and other game entities that have a role in the narrative story, whereby each entity's agency should be granted an equal opportunity to direct the game narrative development. So, if we summarize how we actualize the conceptualization of procedural agency by Bettina Bori regarding the principles of freedom as non-domination and equality, which are the core principles of democracy. An agency can be deemed democratic, first, if the player's meaningful action expressed via avatars as afforded by the game design cannot arbitrarily interfere with the action of other entities such as characters, NPCs, avatars, and others within gameplay. That is the freedom as non-domination principle in its core. Second, this freedom as non-domination principle is practically implemented by a distribution of agency among the player's avatar and game entities, whereby each entity is granted an equal opportunity to direct the game by initiating meaningful action. That is the equality principle, and consequently it should pose certain constraints on the player, so he is not the dominant actor. So now we can move on to... No, we have still things to say.
Yeah, which is fine.
You
But
can
yeah,
say that.
we can move to the design principles probably, and our concept. I having rules in the world. So with our concept of with our striving to design principles, concept of the agency within the Lithium game. But yeah, needless to say, as far in the Bethana's about this conceptualization, the level of democratic agency is subject to degrees. Therefore, we are not aiming to create or analyze games which would be like 100% like better in their depiction of agency, but we are rather aiming to work with the agency as a degree, which is also used for the final rhetorics of the game or final message, which is in our case educational and democratic. Our larger case studies and our paper will be based on presentations and case studies within the more games. It's actually Frostpunk, Decarbonize, Civilization 6 Gathering Storm, and I think a Democratic Simulator from the Way Industry. And yeah, not a Democratic Simulator, but Green New Deal Simulator actually. So yeah, this is our larger framework, but here we want to present our design principles mostly, and the case study on lithium. So without further ado, we would like to introduce the design principles. First, it's stemming from the conceptualization of the democratic agency. First, we are asking about meaningfulness of game action between players and the system. Second, we are asking for the palpable impact of player action, agency in exploring the meaningfulness of game action. Third, we are asking for a player agency at the procedural level and in-game narrative. Possibility of action afforded by game design and its procedural rhetorics within its ethos. That means the game's paratext, the game visual side, the larger effects the game affords. Fourth, there are a degree of equality of game actors, as Gabriel described, and the degree of freedom as non-domination structure within the game system. And sixth, very important, there is the question for the level of interdependence of one actor on the other. Or, in other words, the level of imbalance of agency, power between game actors and the degree of arbitrariness of the power of the dominant actor.
I think it is important thing to say that for us the question is how these principles, democratic principles, apply at the procedural level of game mechanics and narrative level respectively. Our initial perspective is that procedural agency, as understood within procedural rhetorics, ought to come before the narrative level, rather than the other way around. In other words, democratic agencies in terms of narrative of games should follow procedural design decisions. Our theoretical framework can be demonstrated through the application of our game Lithium that we will just describe. And this game employs procedural mechanics that emphasize freedom as non-domination, hopefully, we hope we succeeded in that, and are linked to the narrative of democratic contestation in the context of lithium mining.
So, from early 2024, we are designing an activist educational game with the Blue Pulsar collective that currently stands for me, Gabriela, Michal Žák, Vojtěch Košař, and Veronika Petrová as programmers and designers. And the game is trying to bring conflicting agencies within multiple actors at this level of the framework, but also to introduce the larger scale of lithium mining issues locally, which is the game is centered around the Cínovec area and Cinwald area at Czech-German borders. There is quite a large deposit of lithium, which is to be mined from the both sides, which has the very palpable environmental impacts and also impacts on the quality of living of the people that stay there, which is very harsh, but that's something which is depicted in the game. The game also importantly tries to bring the larger picture and incorporate the global issues with lithium mining, which is actually a strategic resource currently for the green transition. And we are also trying to somehow bring into the picture the questions of the growth, the questions of consumerism, and how to understand all those cycles, and also how to do the ecological response that would also allow for democratic decision making.
And we kind of try to contribute to a vision of more just future of democratic development and ecological development and the green transition as such.
So we will probably show you the study. We have already laid out the design principles, and I'm just thinking. I think we can start the game. Yes. So the game is currently in development, and therefore we will actually only be able to show the Czech version of the game, but the English and hopefully maybe other languages variants is coming in late 2024, early 2025. We will probably try to publish the game on itch.io and Steam. Currently, since the game is actually commissioned first by Galerie Hraničář in Ústí nad Labem, which is also very important, and it's actually a part of the ongoing exhibition about the lithium, which started last Friday and will continue until the spring 2050.
Yeah, I think we can say that Hraničář in Ústí nad Labem is very close to Cínovec and Cinwald, so it's in the same region in the Czech Republic. So there are mutual collaborations between the activists and between the artists and curators and or theorists and sociologists and many others.
But if you want to try the game in Czech, which is probably very hard if you are not a Czech speaker, you still can if you join our Discord, which we invite you to do, because you can get in the updates on the English version. And also, if you are maybe in some lithium mining area, which is happening all around the world, please contact us, and we are also inviting you to participate in the game development in this sense.
With some interviews, for example, because interviews are an important part of the game.
Yeah.
So you can play.
You can play. I will probably borrow the computer.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So now I will play the game, so you can see the gameplay and the visuals and the interviews, and Philip will be talking about the mechanics, the principles, the design decisions.
I will present the case study we made very briefly, and then we can discuss the gameplay and maybe the UI. So. The game revolves around three factions, which are represented by activists, city, and locals, which are also largely representing the social groups within the area. Each of the social groups within the game has specific procedural upsides and downsides. For example, activists are able to generate lots of energy towards further actions. The city is basically good with funding and with getting media attention and affirmation. The locals are actually bringing the motivation and the real impacts of the actions. Yeah, and so this is the start of the game. First, Gabriel will choose the...
I need to choose something.
So,
I will play for the logos.
Nice choice. And then the game starts. This is the tutorial screen, which is basically showing you how to play. To win, you have to either make a strong coalition of all the three factions or social groups within the game. Then the second option is to stall the development of the project, to block it as long enough as possible, which is actually in this scenario, which is the shorter one, 2 years. And the last possible goal is to, which is actually very important, is to finish up the deliberation project, which is actually the game rhetorics about democratic innovation and long-term goals. Because other goals will give you limited ban on lithium mining in the area, because then in some future there will be next part and next corporation that will come to mind. And yeah, but the larger political project might give you some more time.
Yeah, I will say something about the narrative democratic agency later in the presentation, but now I can say that the deliberation represents kind of a structural solution to some problems. It is a vision of how to do democracies more just, and how to make them more fair, how to make them more responsive to specific people in certain areas or regions, like in Xenobits. But I will say about that later in the presentation. So go on.
So this is something we were talking about. The last thing we forgot is the how to say it, like affirmation meter, which is actually showing you the support you as a collective have within the society to block the mining currently, which you can use as kind of also a resource in a sense to pay for the actions within the cards, to pay for the deliberation projects. In certain harder scenarios, if you lose it, you will actually lose the game, which is not great. But if you have lots of affirmation, you can get certain bonuses also to your gameplay. And yes, since the game is it's actually a mix of deck builder and a mix of area control game, you have a piece which is actually representing your collective, or the collective of your, the collective which is opposing the mining project currently. And yeah, you will move it across the map, which is actually something Gabriel will do now.
So I'm going to Xenobits. That's the main city affected by the mining, by the mining plan in the future.
It's not a city per se, it's rather a village, but maybe on the German side, the Zinwaldes, or the Altenberg, and so yeah. And this is actually a tutorial screen, so now it's actually telling the players how they will get the cards, which is very simple. They will get 4 cards in the beginning, so it's okay. And you can see Gabriel has the green avatar, and the developer has the black piece actually. Yeah, how the developer plays, it's actually automata, or like it's very simple mechanics. The developer has its own deck, which is actually showing 2 cards each round. The first card is setting the movement and developer's priority currently. The second card is showing the action, but it's hidden until the end of the turn.
I will stay where I am.
Yes. And then you have a certain number of the actions. In general, we can say you can first play cards. You can then stash cards into the stash, basically, which will allow you to get resources to play other cards. And then you can skip the turn if you don't want to play for any reason this turn. And these are the cards. On the right corner you can see the stash price. If you stash the card, you will get maybe one monetary version for this card, which is actually this card. On the left top you can see the cost of the card. So Gabriel stashed the first card. We are very sorry that we cannot translate everything actually currently, but stay with us and be with us. Like soon we will have English translation, which will also allow to translate to other languages. This card, for example, is Discord, and is actually removing one piece or one argument from the collective. And also it's allowing Gabriel to move the developer to basically stall the project by kind of sabotaging the development process. So now Gabriel can move the developer to area without the mining projects, and then for hopefully stall the project to the turn. Do you want to tell something about the reactions? It's quite important also. But yeah, maybe I will show it and you will play. The game is also how to, when we are talking about the larger design principles and the interdependence of the game actors, and somehow how to bring the environment to the picture. We are actually using this very it's kind of simple system of reaction cards, which actually if you play certain cards, maybe this card, maybe something else, you will get a reaction from one of the three decks. It's actually a deck of capital, which is representing the financial material structures within the world and their hegemony. You can get the reactions from the policy deck, which is actually representing the state politics.
Mm-hmm.
The
government structures,
the bureaucratic workings, stuff like that. And lastly, you can get the reaction from the environment, which is representing both the nature, but also the local residents, which are maybe not participating in the struggle against the mining.
Yeah. And so now I got a reaction from the government structures. It's a law stating that certain projects or mining operations or constructions are strategic for the state, so it is in the interest of all people within the country to do the mining. And so this is an example of the government reaction, and that is, by the way, real law in Czech Republic. So there are also some facts from our own countries and other things. So it's in my deck right now.
It's now in our deck, and you may draw it at some part of the game, like later. And if you draw it in your turn, you cannot skip the turn without playing it or somehow getting it out of your hand.
Mm-hmm.
So
I must manage.
Yeah, you must manage. And this is like decentering the player agency, in a sense that the player is not the hegemonic actor, it's just the actionable actor, same as developer. And we have two cards left. One is Discord again. It's again a way to get rid of the cards, maybe actually the reactions in the future. And then we have the Vila de Přírody, which is trip to nature in Czech, and it's basically a card which is allowing you to rest.
Yeah, I decided to choose the strategy to work on the deliberation process. That is one of the winning strategy. I want to organize a group that will found a deliberation decision-making process that will oppose the lithium mining operation. with some inputs of scientists and locals and all the affected people within the situation. And now I want to do the work on deliberation. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, each deliberation project is actually 9 projects within the game. It's 9 cards which you can draw if you have the cards to turn them up. And yeah, if you press the button, you can actually stash the resources on the project, and if you have the amount resources shown in the middle, you will actually complete the project and you can continue with the others. To win with the deliberation, you need to basically have completed 9 projects. The last one is start of the deliberation, so you are actually not doing the politics per se, you are rather mediating or like doing the background structure towards the actual political process.
Yeah, and it's kind of bottom-up approach, so you're trying to organize the liberation group from the bottom, from the local perspective, not from the government perspective. It's not imposed on the locals and on the activists.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you can say something about the interviews?
There was an interview. Mm-hmm. So we conducted interviews with up to now, so far, like 3 people. One is a representative from the locals, and 2 are scientists or experts in a given in an area that are important for the game. First was Nina Dukanovic, who is doing her PhD on lithium mining in Serbia and on the resistance from the locals in Serbia. And the other is Itka Polakis, who is an environmental geographist. Mm-hmm. And she's interested in the conservation of nature within, like, around the area of Cínovec and Cinvold and on the Czech-German border in the region that Cínovec is part of. So now I open the first interview, and I can chat with Kamila Vítek-Darinková, who is local in Cínovec and is opposing the lithium mining project.
We will have the translation again, but like suffice to say, we are trying to somehow bring into the picture the workings of the mining, the impacts, the effects people around have, and also because people we are interviewing are somehow involved with the discourse against the mining. Also their political strategies they implement in the real life, which is actually very true for Kamila Vítek-Darinková, who is also participating in Cinvold, I'm not sure how to translate spolek, but maybe collective is the process, which is actually opposing the mining locally and on a political level of local governments, can you say?
Yeah. Like local and state, because it's more important for the state level structure of the government, like for the government itself actually, for our Prime Minister and these sort of actors. And the local structures, the local political structures in the Czech Republic seem to be more opposed to the project also, but that's another level of the problem in the Czech Republic.
And yeah, currently we have the 2 scenarios. The first one is focused on Cínovec rally, the second one, the larger one, is focused on the larger area with Ústí nad Labem and surrounding areas with the infrastructure projects. The third one we are applying to release in the winter is actually the German side of the view, and basically introducing the areas around Altenberg or Cinvold and the German borders with Itka Polakis actually. So yeah, we are currently being able to escape to the next round. And yeah, the game will finish up the tutorial nowadays, or not nowadays, now. And it will basically, the second action of the developer is shown, which is actually telling us what will happen as the action, and then there is the cleanup phase, basically very gamer setting, I would say. But yeah, it's just preparing for the next round, and it's reminding us about the reactions, about the deliberation, and the usage of the resources. So yeah, and now it's up to us. And yeah, again, the developer in this game wins. He finishes up the 2/3 of the project. So we will probably show one more round, and yeah, we will try not to basically to stall the development of the project and stuff. Okay.
So now I move to the Ore Mountains and check Krušné hory, which is it's a area of nature that shall be protected in the very near future, but will be very affected by the lithium mining. So I need to defend the Ore Mountains.
And now actually we have this medio zákon card, which is the reaction we drew last time, which actually it's appropriation of the local land by government law, which will actually randomly remove through 2 of our local cards from our deck, which is not great for us because we are actually playing for the locals, so we have the local on the deck now. And yeah. And this is the contact European Commission card, which is like trying to spread the protests or the blockades further from the local governments too, and it's actually allowing you to bring in to our collective card from the city faction. So yeah.
I will choose the card which enables me to open a new card of the project of the deliberation project, so I can work on another card from the deliberation.
Sounds good. The other options are blockades, the organizations, stuff like that.
Yeah, here are the deliberation projects, and I will get another one if I play the card. This one.
You can play it for the affirmation, even though you don't have the resources needed.
Yeah, that's the affirmation here. And I have resources here. Okay, so I will try to get some resources from my other cards, and I will lose a lot of affirmation cards, but
half of it, but it doesn't matter. You can actually move the developer, which will save you the day, possibly. So to save that, and new deliberation is called Petition for a Deliberation about lithium mining. And the card is also tweaking the rules actually, so now we can draw more cards if we have enough of the affirmation, which is not true for us. If we finish it, we will get affirmation and we will open up a new deliberation card. So that's really good, but at the end of the turn we actually need to play the medio zákon card, which will rid us of 2 locals.
Yeah, and it will result in losing 2 cards from the local decks. But so, I mean, the logic behind the reaction is that the government law has an impact on the locals' opportunities, points, and these kinds of things.
And yeah, before we basically, maybe we can show one more turn, but maybe
we can speak more about the principles
that's probably
in the case study.
what I want to show actually is it's not only this is actually a game manual, but the idea behind it is actually it's not only a digital game, but it's also a board game, possibly. A board game which we want to release also somewhere around the winter with the English translation. We don't know how we will do it, but hopefully we will be able to manage at least to have some open source cards, which should allow you to print it out at your home, download the digital version, read the rules and play the game, maybe with up to 4 players if one is taking the negative role of the developer, which is obviously not fun at all. And yes, so we promised the case study, and I will just run through it briefly. The Lithium is, as you've seen, is a turn-based strategy card game where players interact with game by playing or stashing cards. On the narrative level, the procedural player agency is complemented with interviews with locals and experts, actors that are to be explored by players along with the game encyclopedia that allows players to explore further concepts related to the growth and ecological impact of the mining within the game paratext. The impact of player action is palpable, as you have seen with the playing the game cards, the playing or stashing the cards during the deliberations, and also watching the developer to destroy the map. There is also a possibility to recultivate the map, but it's never the absolute fix. It's actually maybe a mending, which is not perfect. So it's also important rhetorics of the game, that some level of recultivation is very important, but there is no clean energy, and there is probably no clean SUVs, to say that. And yes, so even if you mine some virtual and even if you recultivate it, it's better basically not to do that in the first place, because then you will get the nature that is. On the narrative level, Lithium Ethos supports the rhetorics of game actions with interviews, as we said. This is while also keeping in mind the possible subversive player agency and player gameplay, which is still supported and even endorsed in the board game version of the Lithium game, which will be downloadable and which is actually fostering players to tweak the rules and play with maybe their local context, introduce new cards, etc. The actionable actors are not equal in the game, but at the same time there is no dominant actor. The player is never absolutely dominant. The player agency gets discentered with the reaction cards and with the movement of the developer, which is also not a hegemonic actor. It has political constraints, it has the constraints of the struggle.
Yeah, there are contestation between, among all the actors that have a role in the narrative.
That being said, actually, neither of the two actors is dominant. The agency or developer is leading the player action, which is somehow also further centering the agency. The role of derivation is crucial in the game design, as it allows to plan beyond the temporal action, beyond the crisis and reaction cycles. And finally, the two Victor and Lithium is connected to the deliberation projects rather than only the blockade or only the coalition, which are reasonable victories but are not perfect. And finally there is the interdependence of all the game actors, players, developers, the nature, which can be seen in the reaction decks, in the leading by the developer, in the constraints of the designs, which are all in all, even on the meta level of the board game, basically making up the constructing the game final procedural rhetorics and the game message. Hopefully, we are including also the interviews. I think we are also bringing the local perspectives and also the expert perspectives. So it's not only a presentation, it's also showing the real issue. So sorry, we ran into some technical issues and we are back again. and we will also finish up shortly.
So let me conclude the presentation of the game Lithium with a few brief notes on the narrative democratic agency that completes the procedural setting. First, locals, and I mean city and locals, and activists are considered primary agents of democratic action in the game, representing grassroots political opposition driven by the anticipated environmental and social consequences of mining operations. These democratic actors can be viewed as part of a contestatory citizenry, which, according to Philippe Petit, serves as the crucial mechanism for democracies to achieve equal governmental control and, consequently, freedom from domination. Also, the game emphasizes the importance of collaborative efforts between all these groups and between deliberative democratic innovations proponents and local community members in order to succeed against the lithium mining project. This joint organization between all the groups and the deliberation proponents is seen as a vital component for winning the game. Democratic innovations such as citizen assemblies and juries that are being implemented around the world in democracies are institutional mechanisms that are being created to increase and deepen citizen participation in the political decision-making process. These innovations often incorporate a strong deliberative component in which citizens and experts engage in thoughtful discussions about political issues. And this approach is expected to, this deliberative approach is expected to result in more informed decisions that take the citizens' and experts' concerns into account. So as a result, there is a growing tendency to utilize these innovations in decision-making related to very concerning and polarizing issues, including, for example, environmental topics such as climate change. In light of the differences between civil resistance, civil protests, and opposition toward the project, and democratic innovations that are more institutional, more formal form of protest within the system, or rather opposition than protest, we view these two forms, the civil resistance and democratic innovations, as complementary for cultivating democratic agency within the game, but also within real-life democracies. In Lithium, the locals and activists' efforts not only conclude with communicative and symbolic values of protests, but rather extend to the institutional democratic decision-making process to initiate systematic social transformation within those democracies. So by integrating this feature into Lithium, we aim to empower the local community of Teenovets by providing them with a vision of democratic transformation so they may have the institutional opportunity and support to participate in decisions that will affect them.
So thank you very much for being with us, for inviting us, and for watching this presentation. We will be happy if you contact us with any questions concerning our research or concerning the game. If you want to delve more closely into our resources, please take screenshots, and basically you can find whatever you like, which should be in the presentations. And lastly, please, we will be also very happy if you are interested in the game, and feel free to join our Discord. We will like to talk with you, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And enjoy the conference.
Enjoy.
Y con esto cerramos la sesión de hoy. Una sesión más corta, pero increíblemente interesante. Es necesario repensarnos y repensar el rol de los videojuegos como medio que nos ayuda a transitar este colapso. La historia no está escrita, el futuro no está escrito. Si el videojuego ha sido hasta hoy en día algo, no quiere decir que sea siempre lo mismo en los próximos. tenemos la agencia, la posibilidad de cambiarlo, tenemos la urgencia de pensar nuevos tipos de juegos, nuevos tipos de agencia dentro de los juegos, nuevos tipos de jugabilidades, nuevos tipos de productos. Estos UFO que hablaba y comentaba Matteo Lupetti, pues nosotros en Ars Games desde hace años lo pensamos como OVNI, objetos videolúdicos no identificados. El videojuego es un medio vivo que constantemente se transforma. Creo y creemos desde esta mesa y desde Ars Games que nos puede ayudar enormemente a transitar el colapso. Así que, pues, esta es la invitación. Hoy cerramos, seguimos mañana. Hasta pronto.
Con estas jornadas pretendemos no solo llamar la atención de la sociedad civil en torno a los derechos digitales. Creemos que cada vez más las instituciones están entendiendo la urgencia de hablar sobre esos temas y tomar una posición.
Después de 4 años, cuando iniciamos, que no había nada de regulación al respecto, ni se estaban debatiendo los derechos digitales en videojuegos, este año hemos podido contar con esta eurodiputada Maldonado, que nos hablaba de las regulaciones que se están impulsando, ya no solo a nivel España, con las que contábamos el año pasado, sino a nivel europeo, lo cual creemos que es un gran avance, aunque todavía queda mucho camino por recorrer.
En el informe se hace un llamamiento especial a la Comisión Europea para que evalúen más a fondo el problema de las prácticas agresivas y los diseños de juego engañosos, y que evalúe cómo regular las cajas botín o loot boxes.
Que habría que hacer un trabajo transdisciplinario desde dentro de los desarrolladores de defensas digitales, etcétera, para que puedan tomar conciencia que detrás de ese usuario hay una persona y que esa persona está enmarcada en un sistema de derechos.
Hemos empezado con la mesa ciudadana del videojuego, donde hemos aunado industria, sociedad civil, academia, en torno a retos que realmente son difíciles y que realmente son incipientes en la sociedad. Creo que estamos marcando metodología de trabajo colaborativo en torno a temas que cada vez más serán centrales. A la vez hemos generado conocimiento abierto para empoderar las comunidades con Baba School de Isicano, donde jóvenes y docentes a la vez han podido aprender cómo a través de un videojuego es posible generar cultura, pedagogía y romper estereotipos. Y por otro lado, con Rafa Laguna, cómo a través del videojuego es posible construir tecnología libres.
Podemos ver cómo se establece también este software como un software de referencia para la producción profesional, que cada vez está teniendo muchísimos más usuarios y muchísima más comunidad alrededor.
Por si no lo conocéis, Blood Engine es un motor de código abierto para hacer videojuegos de todo tipo. 2D, 3D, también puedes hacer programas, aplicaciones y de todo un poco. Godot incluye todas las herramientas que te hagan falta para hacer un videojuego, desde editor de mapas, animaciones, editor de código, y al ser de código abierto puedes hacer con él lo que quieras.
Hemos establecido como una nueva forma de entender estas jornadas, no solo como un lugar, un espacio de debate, sino un espacio de creación y colaboración.
Creo que es un punto muy interesante ver cómo partimos casi de una nada donde apenas se está trabajando el tema, a esta parte en la que ya todas las ideas y cuestiones empiezan a sentar, y esperamos que todos los pasos y todo el camino que todavía queda por hacer de cara a las siguientes esté todavía más cimentado.